All right, welcome everyone to our Covenant Youth 101 webinar on communication strategies that work. As you know, we are putting together a suite of resources for youth leaders that will hopefully be useful for veterans and new youth leaders alike. And this year, we are really focusing on some of the core essential skills that are helpful for youth ministry. Today, we are focusing on communication. Communication is essential for healthy and thriving ministry. And so the purpose of this webinar today is to help us to move beyond simply sharing information in communication to powerful ministry and influence. So I believe those things, powerful ministry and influence, are significantly impacted by our communication strategies. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So as we go along, I would encourage you to type into the chat questions that you might want for us to talk about when we get to the end. I would also encourage you to type in your own ideas and resources as I mentioned different topics about communication as we go along and share them with each other. Love to see a lively discourse in the chat. And so we encourage you, we'd love to see you sharing your own ideas and resources as we go along. So, all right, let's begin and lay out what we see is why communication, having a good communication strategy is going to be critical to ministry. Number one is communicating well builds your credibility with your students, with your parents, with the church, and with your church leaders and the church at large. I like to, I have an illustration I like to use, especially with new and young youth leaders. And I like to make the analogy that you have a bank account with your church that you are building credibility in. So it's not money, although we have budgets and such. And of course, that's there's a whole other thing. This is an analogy. So imagine that you have this imaginary bank account that holds your credibility. And when you get hired at a church, it's kind of like when you open a bank account and sometimes they give you some money to start off with. It's like your initial deposit. And your title, the position that you have as you come into a church is your initial deposit. And so there's a little bit of credit there. You have some credibility because of that, but it's only a little bit. And as you go through time in your ministry at the church, you will be making deposits and withdrawals from that credibility. And when you're early, if you want to do something really risky or challenging or something like that, you might not have the credit that's there in order to be able to do that. And the way to build that up is just like a bank account. The best way to build up a bank account is to make small deposits over time. The best way to build your credibility bank account with the church is to make small deposits over time. And I believe that clear and effective and consistent communication is one of the best ways to do that. As you show yourself capable, faithful, and reliable through careful and intentional communication, every time you put out an email, send a text, let people know what's going on so they never feel like they're out of the loop. They always feel connected. They always feel like they know where to go to get the information they need. Then you are making one of those small deposits. And those small deposits will have huge dividends over time. So if someday down the road you have a problem, there's something going on, you'll have built up credibility that you will be able to cover that debt that might happen. Or if you want to take a big risk and try a new program or do something that no one expects and they think that sounds crazy, they'll buy in if you've built up that account or credibility. So that's my that's how I see community. One of the first things and the main reasons we want to effectively communicate, because it will build your credibility with the larger church, with your ministry, with your students, with your parents. It also shows that you care about parents and families. If you when you communicate consistently and carefully, it is actually like a love language that you're sharing with the people in your ministry, especially parents. And if you fail to communicate, then the opposite is true. People will feel unloved. They'll feel uncared for. They'll feel like you're not making them a priority when we fail to communicate well. Communicating well also streamlines your ministry. It streamlines your meetings and events. So if you are communicating well, then people will come into meetings already kind of knowing what to expect, what's happening, and it'll shortcut a lot of the problems that tend to come up in meetings where people just are unprepared, they don't know what's happening. And as well as events, if you have communicated your event well, what are the expectations, the times, all those kind of things, it shortcuts all the problems that you end up having, like the day of an event when all the parents and students are calling and say, what am I doing? How do I do this? Where do I go? That kind of thing. And then lastly, communicating well, I think establishes your culture, vision, mission, and purpose. So those are all like big words that are really important that we're developing in ministry. And so we want to make sure that we are cultivating those. One of the best ways to do that is through clear and effective communication. Then this is the part of what we're talking about. This is we're going beyond just sharing information to powerful ministry and influence. When we are careful to communicate our vision, our mission, and purpose, then we bring people along and we make it so that they are able to catch that vision, see it, understand it, and then hopefully be able to communicate it to others. So communication, just to review, why is this so important, is that it builds our credibility. It shows that we care about parents and families. It helps us to streamline our ministry, our meetings, and our events, and it establishes our culture, vision, mission, and purpose. So as we go along today, we're going to talk about strategies that in communication will help us to accomplish those things. And I think one of the first things, the best thing you can do is to come up with a communication plan. If you've been a part of any of the webinars that I've helped teach, you'll find that I often am promoting the idea of having a plan. And so I would encourage you to think of it in the ways of like systems with ministry. If we put together healthy and sustainable systems, they will help us in the long term, the long run of our ministries. So the first thing that I want you to think about when you putting together a communication plan is what will be your communication cadence. Cadence is the first element for putting together a communications plan. And by cadence, what I mean is when and what will you be communicating on a regular basis? And how? When, what, and how will you be communicating on a regular basis? Now, for each ministry, we all have different contexts. And so this will look different ministry to ministry. But I can give you an example of what I have done that might be helpful to you. So I looked at communications happening in 3 primary modes. So I did a weekly communication to parents and students as a youth pastor. My communication to students each week was usually by text, and it was simply the information they needed and an invitation to join us for the events we had going on that week. So if it was youth group, that would happen on Wednesday night, usually on a Tuesday or sometimes on a Wednesday, I would send out a mass text and it would say, hey, join us tonight. We're going to be starting at 7:00. You can, and I might include like a teaser of what to expect. We're going to have this, fun game. We're going to throw water balloons at each other or whatever. So that weekly text would go out to students. And then I would also include a weekly email to parents. And I'd usually send that out on Monday and Tuesday because parents usually are planning a little bit further ahead than the students. And in the email to parents every week, I would have the same information about like, here's what's happening this week. We have youth group, but I would be a little bit more detailed. I would say, okay, here is our topic for this week. And here are some questions that might be helpful for you to use for the ride home. If you pick up your student and you're going to say, hey, how was youth group? And they always say, no, it was fine, or it was fun, or whatever. I would give them a tool that they might be able to use when they go home. So if our topic that week was on, the love that Jesus has for all peoples and whatever, no matter what race or background, then I would include a question, something about like to that nature. They could simply ask their student on their way home. So that was my weekly cadence. And then I also did a monthly email. So the monthly email was the email that I would send to parents and to students, and they would both get the same email. In that email, I would include a calendar that included everything that was going to be happening that coming month. So it would be our weekly events that we had, like midweek or Sunday school. It would also include the special event, any kind of special event that we would have that was coming up that week. If we were doing a roller skating thing or an all-night party or social outreach kind of thing, or service project, whatever it was, that would be clearly in that calendar. And then there would also be the details, like in text. Here's what you need to know. If there were flyers, information, links for registration, or whatever, those kind of things, all those kind of things were included in that monthly email. And as much as I could, I wasn't always able to do this, but I also tried to share a story in that email. So in that email, we're telling everyone that's reading it, like, here's what youth ministry at our church is about. And so sometimes it was a fun story, like, hey, this last week we did a big water war and it was so much fun. We went through 500 water balloons and everybody had a blast. Or I might include a student testimony. Sometimes I've had students even write testimonies like, hey, here's the way God spoke to me this month, and include that in that email. It could be really anything, but what I was trying to do was move beyond just here's information, but say why this information is important. And then the last kind of cadence thing that I would do is when I was with communication was a quarterly calendar that I would send out to everybody. I'd make it available to everybody, but this in my mind was mainly for parents. This also would coincide with a parent meeting that I would do quarterly, but I also send it out via email. And this calendar was for the entire year. And that might sound crazy, but for me, I found it really helpful. And when I make very clear in that calendar, I did it, like typed it out. I would say like this month is January, and I just kind of like had bullets instead of like a calendar with a grid, because I felt like I could fit it all on one page. But you can do whatever works for you. But I would say I'd make it very clear on this calendar, the next 3 months, this is what we're doing. The 3 months to 9 months, that 6 month space, this is what we anticipate that we'll be doing, but give us some wiggle room. We might have to make some changes. And then that final 3 months, the ones that are 9 months away out to the end of the year, this will be like, this is what we kind of are looking at and hoping to do. And so I found that yearly calendar was really helpful especially for parents, as they are making long-term plans and they're trying to, decide when they're going to go on vacation or what they're going to do in the coming year. And so it was really helpful to them. So those are the three cadences that I used when I was a youth pastor. And what I found was that really helped in a couple of ways. One was because I was consistent in doing that, it built that credibility. Because I was careful to make sure that all those avenues had the information that was the correct information that was needed, then that was also helpful in that they were able to, it streamlined things so that the information was out there in so many different places that very rarely did I end up having many people with questions. But the one thing it did for me was a kind of an unanticipated result was it held me accountable to planning ahead, because I knew that every week I needed to put out an email to the parents saying, hey, here's what's going on, and here's a question you can ask your student. And so what that did is it removed the temptation for me to put off planning Wednesday night until Wednesday night, because I needed to get that information out on a Monday. Same thing was true with that monthly calendar. I knew that I was going to be sending out a monthly newsletter, and it was going to have all the information about the events coming in the coming month. And so before I sent that out, I had to have the details for those things figured out. So it removed the temptation to postpone making those plans. And then the same thing with the yearly calendar. And that was probably the most challenging. But after you've been in ministry for a little while, and you've kind of maybe gone through a season, then you will find yourself more and more, find you're kind of repeating things over and over, and you find it's easier to plan that yearly calendar. But even if you haven't had that, just taking the time to think through, what do I want to do? And if you do that alongside, this is a topic for another webinar. If you do that alongside with your vision and values, and so then you plan out a year and say, okay, these are the events we're going to do to accomplish our mission, then that is another way to hold you accountable to your mission and your values. So having a communication cadence, plan, a strategy that way is huge in helping us hold us accountable to our plan and what we want to do. So I'm going to pause for a minute. If you have any questions about this idea of a cadence and having a plan, please type them into the chat, because I like to do it. But I'm going to invite Jim Eaton to join us. He's just joined the room, and he's going to come in and he's going to continue to help us as we talk about this whole process of developing communication strategies that work. There's Jim. How you doing?
Hey, y'all.
Talking about communication strategies at work, we apparently had some difficulty communicating when this when this started today. So I apologize. I take all the blame for it, Jim.
Oh, no, my fault.
Glad you're here. So
hey, good to see y'all.
Yeah. I've welcomed everybody and gone over the introduction and started to go through the whole communication cadence part of our plan. So Jim has many, many years of youth ministry experience in a lot of different contexts, and has through that learned a lot of really effective communication strategies. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to take it kind of from here as we go into more. I think he's going to unpack a little bit more some ideas about having a communication cadence, and then go from there. So Jim, take it away. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Good to see you all. Communication cadence is huge because like Eric was saying just a minute ago, it helps hold you accountable to those things that are coming, and also to which helps your own planning, right? So one of the things that I started to talk through is kind of what I've utilized in the past, and some of this is maybe some of Eric's thoughts too, but a weekly email is huge. And for me, I used MailChimp to do a weekly email. And the reason I used MailChimp is because I could throw graphics in there, things like that. So if you have the ability to use an email client or software like MailChimp or Constant Contact, like for me, I found my engagement went up when I went from just a plain text email to being able to utilize those things. So anyway, so a weekly email. And for me, in the contexts that I've worked in, those weekly emails have been more detail oriented. So it's more like, hey, youth group is coming up. Here's what you need to know. Reminders, like we're doing this thing, bring $5, make sure you meet here at this time, whatever those details are that are kind of those reminders last minute. And then, so they're a little more detail oriented. I would often at the bottom of those emails put like hey, upcoming dates, kind of reminders. But then the other idea is doing like a monthly newsletter, which I know Eric has engaged with in the past. I've done that, but less frequently. In the context I was in, they just weren't quite as impactful. But those can be more still email oriented, or if you want to print them and mail them, you can. But those maybe are more story and vision oriented, where you're looking back at the previous month and saying, here's a picture or two from youth group or from this retreat that we did, or whatever the thing may be, the event, and you're telling the story of what God's been up to and what's happening in your ministry. But then it also looks ahead to the upcoming month to say, hey, here's the themes that are coming up. Here's what we're going to be focusing on in our lessons and things like that. And then there's also the calendar that's a part of it. So it's not just what's happening this week, but it's what's happening this month that you need to make sure is on your calendar for your family and things like that. So that's really helpful. Again, getting back to holding you accountable, because now you're not just thinking about this week, but you're thinking about this month. And then even the third thing, then being a quarterly event calendar. I've done more 3 times a year, but you might do quarterly or 3 or 4 times a year. I did more like a fall calendar, winter, spring, and then a summer. And so, but the thing is, like, you need to release those well before that season comes. So you can't be like, okay, it's June 1st and I'm going to release my summer calendar, because guess what? Families already have their summers planned. So it's like April, or at the, is a good time to be releasing your summer calendar, or maybe the latest you should be releasing your summer calendar. And then also, releasing even a yearly calendar if that's relevant in your mix, which has more of the bigger nuggets, the big rocks on it. So here's when we're going to do camp. Here's when we're going to do a mission trip, or we're going to unite this summer, or our fall retreat, winter retreat, spring retreat. Some of those bigger kind of things you can kind of put on there. There were times where actually on the website for the youth ministry page that I've had, those like repeating events, I just had on the calendar, and it just said, save the date here. Like a year in our youth ministry looks like this. And here's the major things. And I even listed price ranges, so parents could think about budgeting for those things. And that's part of the reason why getting those things out there so far in advance is so important. So
can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah, please.
So what I loved is how you just shared like a slightly different take on a cadence. And I think that that's an important thing to draw out, that for everybody, you're going to do it a little bit differently. Your context is going to be different. It's what will work with some parents might not work in a different context. Those kind of things are we're all going to do it differently. But the important thing is to come up with a plan and stick to it. So whatever it is you need to do in your context, you're going to customize it to do it. Come up with that, but come up with that plan. I think it's really important to write that plan down so that it becomes real for you, and then put it in your own calendar so that you won't forget. So in your own calendar, if you use Google Calendar or your phone or whatever tool you use to keep track of calendaring your own tasks, put it in there. Every Monday at 1:00, I'm sending the email to parents, or Tuesday, or whatever it is your context. Every last Thursday of the month, I'm sending out my newsletter. Whatever it is, but put that in your calendaring system and mark it as the highest priority, so that when that comes, you will do it. And that will over time become a rhythm, and maybe you don't need that reminder, but at the beginning especially, that will help you to establish that rhythm and the consistency, which is what will be putting money in the bank that'll pay dividends later.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, Eric, I would say for me in the past, Monday mornings has been a calendaring time for me, where I actually would set up all of my email stuff. I would send up all of my social media posts, send up all of my text message reminders, and schedule them throughout the week. And what's great about that is then those systems would just do the work for me. So instead of me having to remember at Wednesday at 3:00, I have to send out a reminder about youth group, to everybody, I can set it on Monday and schedule it and then forget it. And it just goes. So automating those systems as much as possible is really, really helpful as well. That way I had that chunk of time on Monday mornings where I can set all those things up, schedule it, and then let it roll. The difficulty comes when, snowstorm comes or whatever, we can't have youth group, but then I have to remember, where did I post and what did I post? And then I have to go back and edit those things to say no youth group tonight or whatever. But those were farther and fewer between. So, one of the things that you really need to do is pay attention to the context that you serve it within. For example, for calendaring, when I was in one community for quite a while, I didn't learn at first, but eventually I realized that our summer events were not being as attended as well, like camp, big things. And I realized after asking some parents finally, kind of being frustrated, that even though I was getting things out, early spring for the summer, those families, many of the families, the parents worked in the oil refinery. And so they have to actually request their vacation time a year out, which is crazy. And there's also a pill factory. Pfizer has a pill factory there. Those folks also have to request that vacation time a year ahead. So in this summer, they're already looking ahead at their vacation time for next summer, and planning around and planning for those things. And so I then was like, okay, how do I beat that? How do I get ahead of that curve? And so, especially for big things like mission trips and camps, and obviously Unite, thankfully we know generally when that is in the summer calendar. I was able to start a year and a half to be able to put those big things out. Even though I was planning a missions trip, great. I didn't even necessarily have a location, but I just picked the date on the calendar, said we're going at this time, and that way parents could know to plan around it. And if it didn't work, it didn't work. But by being ahead of the curve, we did see our engagement go up in the summer, and kids became more free to be involved in those things because it was working around that culture in that community. I live in Colorado now, and things are much less that way because we don't have quite the pressure of those types of corporations. It's very different here. And so I can be a little later in my communication and still be okay. But anyway, so the key there is, what is the culture of your community? And if you're noticing things like that, where maybe there's a certain season of the year where kids aren't engaging, it might be good to find out why, like what's going on with families, what's going on with their work schedules, things like that. So that can be really, really helpful thing to dig into a little bit. So yeah. And then
I had a good question. Thanks for putting that in there. I kind of typed an answer, but I thought we might bring it up too. He asked about how size of the church might affect your communication strategy, and what day of the month or what month do you put out quarterly emails? I think we kind of addressed that already.
Mm-hmm.
Try to get them out ahead of time, a week or a month ahead of time of when people actually need it. But as far as the size of the church question, I think it does affect it. It clearly affects what you're going to communicate because the number of events and what you're going to do is going to be affected. But I really do think that that any size group is going to appreciate clear and consistent communication. And in some ways, I feel like a smaller group, you actually benefit more from clear and careful communication. A larger group, you can sometimes get away with, like, if enough people know, they'll tell others, and you might kind of get like a group kind of a thinker mentality, that'll contribute to that. Whereas in a smaller group, if you have 4 or 5 students and maybe they don't know each other very well, then they're not going to be communicating with each other. So getting that information to them and to their parents consistently can help a smaller group to grow, to be able to maintain consistency and attendance with those that are there, help them to be able to catch a vision for what you're about and what you're doing, and maybe even lead to more consistent attendance and bringing more people to your events. Yeah, absolutely. I've worked in really small ministries. Like I have 3 students in my church right now. And I've worked in big ministries where we have over 100 students. And I would say that, communication is critical. And it's just as important for me to communicate with the 3 students I have about what's happening and when, and with their parents, especially, as it is with 100 students. Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Josiah. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I do think that there can be some caveat to that depending on community. Like, for example, one church I was in serving in was a very rural church, and there just wasn't much going on other than school sports. And so if we did a spontaneous event, kids would show up because there just wasn't anything else to do. And so, but like that was very different in a bigger city where it's just like there's too much going on. Everybody's involved in everything. So I would say, based on my experience, there can be a little bit of a caveat in that sense. But at the end of the day, even in the smaller town ministry, the communication was still key for the big stuff. So, yep. So a rule of thumb, Eric, that I have is communicating by a factor of 10. So even for youth group, like a youth group reminder, youth group's coming Wednesday. I'm going to communicate that by a factor of 10. And some ways that here's the 10 ways to communicate something's happening. So you do a verbal announcement at youth group, right? So, hey, next week we have youth group again. So make sure you bring some friends, right? Or whatever the announcement is. On Sunday morning, it's an announcement in church, if that is part of the culture of your church. And then it's in the church newsletter, if there is one. Then there's an email to parents that is reminding, right? Then there's a text message to students.
and a text message to parents. And often I put that at like, I'll do 2 of those. Sometimes I'll do one on Monday, assuming the youth group's on Wednesday night, but 2 days ahead, whatever your night is. So if it's Wednesday night, do a Monday afternoon text, maybe, right after school gets out, 3 o'clock or whatever time. That way a kid gets the text message and they're like, oh yeah, I got youth group Wednesday night. Hopefully they're with their friends walking out of the school. And then they can turn to their friend and say, hey, you want to go with me to youth group that, Wednesday night? What's that? And they have a conversation. And then another text on Wednesday before youth group, maybe an hour before youth group starts. Because it's amazing to me how many times parents have come to me and been like, oh, we were going to have our kids there, but we just totally forgot. We were eating dinner and this and that and the other thing, and we just spaced it. We didn't realize until 10 o'clock it was too late. So let's send a text message, an hour before youth group. Hey, can't wait to see you in an hour. So pumped for youth group tonight. Be there, that kind of thing. Doing a Facebook post, an Instagram. I don't remember where I'm at in my numbers, but a Facebook post, an Instagram post. If you have Twitter or X, do a post there. Here's my thing with that is I do not use it. I just never have been a person that's gotten into it, right? And so it drove me nuts. Like I was like, yeah, shouldn't I? Trying to figure that out. But what I realized at one point was that our school systems that in the communities that I was working with post all of their athletic scores and updates from games throughout the game on now X. And so all of our parents are on X. And so I was like, well, if they're seeing all of this school stuff there, then I should have a presence there too. And so maybe in your community, it's not, maybe it's Facebook or some other platform, but whatever that platform is, you should have a presence on and be consistently reminding and posting there. So, and then number 10, I think is number 10. If you have TikTok or if TikTok's relevant, do a TikTok video if you're into that. I'm not super into that, but some people are. So anyway, that's 10 ways. And some of those can be duplicated, different days of the week, like I said, with the text messages and things like that. So that's like for youth group. That's like, I would do all of that for youth group. And it sounds like a lot. And I did get feedback. I'll be honest. I did get some feedback that sometimes parents are like, that's a little too much. But what my goal in creating all of that was to get to the point where I could get ahead of this parent. There's always that parent that just seems to never know what's happening in your ministry. And so my goal was to be able to mitigate that and reduce that number of parents as little as possible so that as few people as possible could have a valid excuse to say, I just didn't know what was happening. So it's like, I'm going to show up. Our ministry is going to show up in their life this week in some way, shape, or form. And that was effective. There was a few folks that said, hey, it's too much. Can you take me off of one of these other things? Sure, I'll help you navigate that. But that's where that came in. So that's where actually email was really, really helpful for me. I did have a parent at one point that no matter what I did to communicate, just kept coming to me and saying, I didn't get the information. Consistently. And so because I had MailChimp, which actually shows who opens your emails and gives you a time and date, or it did at that point. I actually, one time I was frustrated. And so I pulled up the MailChimp app on my phone and I said, actually, I saw that you opened this email on, and I pulled it up and I showed it to them. And I said, this is when you read the information. I never heard from that parent complaining about not getting communication again. But that was an isolated case. But that was my goal, was to be able to communicate to the point where even that parent didn't have an excuse to not have the information. So they would have to be like trying to not get it, essentially. So anyway, so hopefully those are some helpful insights for you in communicating. And the other caveat to that is I would say that the bigger the event, the more communication is needed and the further out the communication is needed. So if you have camp coming up or Unite coming up or a retreat coming up, you need to be getting those dates out way sooner and getting reminders and have scheduled reminders of early bird deadlines and when deposits are due and all of those kinds of things. So those are huge, important reminders for families, because let's be honest, every time that I'm a part of a Zoom call, it's really helpful when someone the person hosting the Zoom call sends the Zoom link right before the meeting, because I'm popping on my email to find the link again, and oh, it's right there. Boom, done. Like, that's kind of, in my mind, the goal of communication with youth ministry, is like, parents are like, when was that again? Hopefully you're timing your communication cadence so that when they open their phone, when they're naturally going to do that, it's going to be boom right there. What time does youth group start? Oh, I just got a text. Oh, it's in an hour. Great. Or when was that form due again? Here's my email. Oh yeah, there's a reminder right there. I can fill it out online on the website. And here's the link. So like, over communicating is really hard to get in trouble for, you know? So yeah, with email, I would encourage you, if you can, use MailChimp or something like Constant Contact. Eric, is there another platform for email that you've used, or other than those, or have you used?
Those are the two I know mainly about.
Yeah. Right on. So those are great tools. And again, like I said earlier, like, you can drop graphics in, you can draw, really make them creative, and add links in that are attractive and things like that. So, I recommend those. Also, like we said, you can schedule those out. So you can write it on Monday, send it on Thursday. I did some research. This was a few years ago, so it might not be relevant now, but I did some research and was like, what's the best day of the week to send those types of emails? And Thursday was the results of that. And so and I thought that was interesting, but in our cadence, because we did Sunday school on Sunday mornings, and in the last few churches I've worked at. And so Thursdays is nice because I can send Sunday reminders, but also gives that, here's what's coming Wednesday night for youth group. So it was like, here's the next week of coming up, and weekends are busy for families. So again, having that information right at the beginning of the weekend with those reminders was really helpful. So let's talk about databases, because databases are huge for communication. If you don't have information and a good way to store it, manage it, and organize it, you can't communicate well, right? So databases are absolutely critical. You need to have something. Hopefully you do, but having the right name, the right contact info, ensures that your communication is going in the right spot. Ultimately, we don't want people to fall through the cracks. So if you take time, this actually does take time and effort. And for me, it's best to do the morning after youth group, or the morning, after like a Sunday morning thing. So Monday mornings and Thursday mornings for me are when I'm most likely to do that, because it's fresh in my mind. Who is new? What was their name? What were their likes, dislikes, interests, things like that. I can note those things if I didn't get a chance to already. And so, but it takes intentional time. So again, like Eric said, calendaring it, putting that as a task on your calendar to manage your information is huge and will help you in those things. It also helps you remember to follow up. And so if there's new people that get added into like MailChimp, for example, sometimes MailChimp easily gets stuck in spam filters. And so part of my follow-up communication is a reminder to that person, hey, we're so glad that we got you in our email list, just confirming that. Please make whatever email address it's coming from a contact in your email client, so that helps the email get through the spam filters better. But it's a part of, you're showing to that person, hey, we know that you're here, we got your information, we care about you, we want you to be part of our community. And so we're taking that extra effort to make sure that we're closing the communication loop and circle. So take time to manage your contacts. Yeah. A good plan eliminates anxiety, right? It eliminates anxiety for you, but it also eliminates anxiety for the people you're communicating with, because they know what to expect in a regular rhythm. Yeah. Eric, have you experienced that in a good or not so good way, where that you've experienced that anxiety around?
Well, yeah, sure. So by that, what I was kind of driving at is if you don't have a good database, then you don't have a certainty that the right people are getting the right information, right?
Yep.
And so that, I feel like it raises anxiety, because you kind of are sitting there wondering, do my students know about this event, or do the parents know the information they need, or whatever? But if you have been careful to get the communication channel right in your database that works for the people you're trying to reach, then you can rest assured, yeah, I've done it. And Absolutely. Now I can move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's an efficiency piece as well. Because if you have the right information, then you can write your email, write your text, write your social media posts, and boom, done. Move on to the next thing, as opposed to like and stressing out over all of that stuff. So taking some time to proactively set up the system is huge. Yeah. So your whatever tool you're using for a database, it should be easy to be updated by you and by others. So that could be volunteers that you're handing that off to, or like if you have someone in your church office, like who else has access to be able to update information. So it should be able to be updated by you and others, also accessed by you and others, especially your volunteers. If you can give your volunteers access to their, like especially small group leaders, right? If they have access to their contact information for their kids, then all of a sudden they're going to be doing the communication with them, taking that off of your own plate. And so that you're equipping them to be in closer proximity and relationship with their students, which is a good thing. And you're also taking something off your plate. I've had leaders in the past that just kind of haven't gotten that. They keep coming to me. Can you tell my small group this? I'm like, no, you can tell your small group this. Let me remind you of your login. Here's your username and password and whatever. So you go do that. So it can be, a good thing for them to be engaged in that. It should be flexible, right? It should be able to hold different kinds of data. So do you want to track birth dates? Yes, you probably should be tracking birth dates, so you can send those reminders and those texts to kids. Do you want to track like when sporting events are, or what kids are involved in what season? Do you want to track attendance? Do you want to track fill in the blank? What is it that you feel like you need? That's really key. So databases is huge. It also needs to be safe. It needs to be accessible to those that need access, but safe, because you do have personal information. So you need it maybe password protected, or what that looks like. This probably shouldn't be contacts on your phone, right? Like your contact app, because nobody else can access it except for you. Yeah. And so that just makes sense to just not do that. It needs to be something different than that. Something like at least a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet, if nothing else. Google Sheet's great because you can share it with those that need access to it. And the bonus, I think, is that if you can find a database system that will generate reports for you, that's huge. So Eric's used Planning Center, I think, and I've used a little bit Planning Center, but I've used Breeze, an app called Breeze. And both of those platforms can create reports for you. That's huge. One way I've used that, especially with my experience with Breeze, is I can tell it to automatically generate a report for me to show up and it shows up at the time I designate, the morning after youth group. That way it's the first thing in my inbox that morning. And what I would have it do is generate one report that shows me who are my first time visitors, because we had an iPad check-in system connected to this. So who are my first time visitors? And then what I would do is follow up with them with a text message that just says, hey, so great to have you at youth group last night. I hope you have an awesome week. Hope to see you next week, right? Already an invite back. And then it would send me students who have missed 2, 3, 4, or maybe it was 3, 4, and 5 weeks of youth group in a row. So it's been a minute since we've seen them, but this Breeze would automatically generate that report for me. And then I could follow up with them and just say, hey, missed you at youth group the last couple of weeks. Hope you're doing okay. How can I be praying for you? And it's amazing to me, the ministry opportunities that have come out of that, where kids say, hey, this happened in my household. Somebody in my family got super sick or was in the hospital. Please be praying. I never would have known that otherwise, right? Or sometimes it's just the check-in kids need to come back to youth group. And they'll be like, oh yeah, been super busy. Sorry I missed. I'll see you next Wednesday. Or whatnot. So that's an awesome tool that, for me, the price of paying for Planning Center or Breeze right there is hugely worth it, because I'm able to actually use those tools to help me do better ministry and support those kids. So
yeah, there might be others too. Planning Center is like a church-wide thing, and I unless your youth ministry is gigantic, you probably wouldn't be able to just sign up for your own Planning Center account. Maybe Breeze, but I'm sure there's others as well. One of the things I like about Google Sheets, it's simple. It doesn't generate reports very well, but it's so easy to share. And that and do it safely, like password protected, that's a good option. So
Yeah, exactly.
Jim, we're starting to run a little bit out of time. I recommend that maybe we skip to the last section
Great.
to wrap up and talk about moving beyond just conveying information through our communication strategy.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As we've noted, facts are important. People need to know the who, the what, the when, the why, and the where. And it can lead to this like, hey, come to this thing, right? Which is awesome. But stories are even more important because you can create the invite, but if people don't have a special attachment to it or an understanding of the deeper, like, why are we gathering? Why are we doing this? What's the point? Then they're not going to come. And so, and for parents, they're not going to send their kids. Kids aren't going to invite their friends, and so on and so forth. So we definitely want to be sharing those stories. So how does your communication share? How does whatever communication you're using, how are you sharing the story of your ministry? Social media is an easy way to do that. Just taking a pic, throwing it on, hey, I had a great time at youth group, or whatever the key thing there is. But what are the shared experiences? Are there opportunities for testimonies? And are there opportunities to share those pictures? So that could be that weekly newsletter. That could be a picture with the announcement in church. That could be, social media stuff. There's lots of ways to do that. How can those stories be written and spoken? And could there even be video involved? Maybe this is inviting one student to do the videoing of other students and saying, hey, I need you to go interview 3 students about our youth ministry. And so you're empowering students to even help you in that communication process. There can be more formal aspects to communicating your story, but there can also be more informal aspects. Formal aspects might be something that's a little more well-produced, or maybe in church, something's a little more formal as opposed to informal, where it's like, hey, I'm going to go live with my Instagram right now, pull Billy over at youth group and say, hey, Billy, what are you looking forward to at youth group tonight? And then you have a conversation with Billy about what he's looking forward to. And then, hey, if you're not coming tonight, make sure you're here next week, that kind of thing.
I would add to that is to consider that your communication plan, you're actually communicating all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so like formal, what I had in mind there was like you put together an email, a video, an announcement, whatever, but also just your one-on-one communication with people, or you find yourself in a group after church, circle of people. Look for opportunities to throw in your stories about youth ministry in those things. When people come and say, hey, how's youth group going? Instead of saying, well, it's okay, we had 20 kids last week or whatever, say, oh, let me tell you about this conversation I had with Jim yesterday, who told me he thinks he's finally ready to let people know he's a believer at school. I'm so excited about that. Just those simple, like that kind of thing, people realize, oh, wow, God's actually working in your ministry. And that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my number one response to the numbers question. Hey, how many kids were at youth group last week? Oh man, let me tell you about this student or what happened in this worship moment or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then I'll answer the numbers question, but I try to give the value first and that I think that I value. And you're going to communicate differently with your audience. Who's your audience? So are you talking to students? Are you talking to parents? Are you talking to upfront in church, or the whole church? So you need to think through those things as well. Some of that comes naturally, but you can be really intentional with that. Parents need a different why, and some buzzwords that I've found helpful in communication with parents is, like, for example, why should I send my kid to Unite as opposed to this other thing? Well, hey, this experience is going to help your kid have an intense experience with Jesus. So they're going to grow, keyword, grow deeper in their relationship with Jesus. This is a leadership opportunity that your student may be able to engage in, or especially if you're doing a missions trip, there's volunteer things. At least in my context of ministry, parents think, how can I help my kid build a resume for the future, for whether that's colleges or jobs or whatever. So in a way, you can promote some things to parents as resume builders. And I don't know where the ethical line in that is, but it's a way to do that. How you communicate can actually help parents think, this is good for my kid. Some parents do have that, hey, how is this going to benefit the spiritual life of my kid? But a lot of parents don't have that, especially kids that if they're community kids, they don't necessarily, their families aren't coming to the church. How are you going to cast that vision to those parents of how this could be helpful for their kid to come? So anyway, just thinking strategically about the audience that you're in. So
and being intentional to engage with each of those audiences.
yes,
Don't neglect the opportunity to tell your youth group story to your larger church.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
Amen. Let's see next. Vision is absolutely the key. And so how does your communication plan cast vision for your ministry? So if you're doing an event or a program or an opportunity, how can you connect that to the vision of your ministry? So using the same language. So if you have a mission statement or you have a key verse that are connected to driving where you're headed with ministry, connecting your events and what you're promoting with that same kind of language is a way to be able to, that can be part of your strategic plan for communicating those things. And then as Eric said earlier, like, how does this fit into the larger purpose of our ministry? Whatever the program or the event or the experience might be, thinking through that and tying it in. And then also, like we kind of just talked about, how does it fit into personal relationship with Jesus and personal growth with Jesus? I know that like when I do fall retreat communication, my communication is often, especially with high school students and parents, is, hey, this is an opportunity to step away from the chaos of this semester and re-engage and reignite your relationship with Jesus. Theoretically, thinking that kids are super busy with all the sports and all the things. So I'm casting that vision about what does this look like to step away, exhale, and breathe and reconnect in that way. So, and then the last piece that we want to touch on is that communication definitely opens the door for partnerships and for collaboration. So what does this look like to help invite others in to your ministry? How does this opportunity or create opportunities to engage in strategic partnerships? Eric, I'm curious what some of the thoughts you might have on this one are, as far as the opportunities to connect, the resources, and things like that you've seen that are really helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is people will say, hey, we partner with parents, but that partnership really boils down to, an email every once in a while saying, here's what we're doing. Come to it, support it or whatever. And so one of the ways that communication can go beyond conveying information is to encourage collaboration and partnership. And so if you're communicating about an upcoming event, maybe include in the communication, like the parents is, this is where rubber really hits the road, I think, is with parents, is to say, and here is how we would love for you to be involved. Bring snacks. You need people to drive, whatever. In your follow-up email, if you do follow-up emails to events, sometimes people will do that, like, here's how it went, and we're really glad for it. Say, here's how you can get involved next time. How would you like to help plan this event? I love your feedback. Let's hear what you as parents thought about this event. Those kind of that's inviting parents to actually be partners in the ministry as opposed to just participants in the ministry, right? So the same thing with volunteers. I've noticed that some people, their extent of empowering volunteers is saying, be here and do what I tell you to do. But in your communication with volunteers, if you're saying these are the opportunities for ways for you to step up and lead, and that's communication that is, maybe some of your written communication, your emails and such to leaders, but in your leader meetings, as you're talking with them, by inviting them into those opportunities, those are maybe helpful. Another way is to provide resources. So parents, I know especially, love it when we say, here is something you can use at home, right? So I mentioned earlier, a very simple one is to give them a question that they can use on the way home to unpack what happened at youth group. But beyond that, you can send them a link like Access Ministry. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's a resource that parents love. It kind of every Friday they send out an email with like 3 cultural things to kind of get a sense of what's going on in youth culture right now. It's really geared towards parents just to help them understand their kids. And so if you sent that to your parents and say, hey, here's a tool that would be useful, why don't you just engage them? You've given them something as opposed to asking something from them. And then, like I said, ask for evaluation, ask for comments, ask for people to get involved beyond just showing up with their body or bringing their student to an event. But those are the kind of things I meant.
Yeah, I think two thoughts I have on that are, with the volunteers is inviting, like in your communication with volunteers, saying, here's what I'm hopeful for with this event. Here's what I'm praying for in terms of the impact in our students. Join me in that. And I think that's a great way to even cast the vision for the specific event and what you're hoping for. And I think anytime we can create feedback loops, right? That's a great thing. I think if we have a culture of feedback, that helps us grow. And so getting parents' feedback is amazing. So, yeah. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to encourage you to think about how your communication can inspire as well as inform, right? That's huge. So your communication, it feels often like really tough, busy work, but you're actually doing pastoral ministry and pastoral care through your communication. You're, like we kind of said at the beginning, you're caring for families by communicating with them proactively in a timely manner, the relevant information. You're caring for them by calling them into the ministry with you, like Eric just said, resourcing them with questions, with links to other resources to continue to support and provide for them as they disciple their students. With your volunteers, you're calling them into it with you, just like you are with the parents. You're inviting them. Your volunteers get to be a little closer to it, right? And a little closer in, especially if they're small group leaders or having in a position to have those spiritual conversations with kids. They get to be a part of that, but they need to be cared for as well. And you're caring for them and their calendars and their families when you're communicating well with them also. And of course, with the whole church, because the church ultimately is like this, they're surrounding everything you do in ministry. And so this is supposed to be not a silo, right? Even though it often is, but it's supposed to be the church doing the work. And so the more that we communicate and cast that vision and inspire to our churches, the more engaged and supportive they can be of us in our ministry, you and your ministry. So, yeah. Well, that's the fire hose, Eric.
Good job, Jim.
Apologize again for the time delay of getting on here.
It worked out just fine.
But
so yeah, we are kind of coming to the end of our time, but if anybody has any further questions, you can feel free to stick them in the chat. I hope that this has been helpful for those that are our live participants. Thanks a lot for joining us today. This has been recorded and we're putting it on CovYouth.com. And so if you have, you're watching the recorded versions, feel free to post questions there on CovYouth.com as well. We'll supply some of the resources that were mentioned. We'll provide links for that along with this video, maybe even some more information if we can, just to be able to help you along the process of this important task of engaging in communication. And I love what you said there, Jim, at the end. Think about how your communication can inspire as well as inform. I would hope for everybody that this webinar will hopefully inspire you to see communication as more than just busy work, just something you have to get done because you're supposed to, and see it as truly an opportunity to make an impact and influence people. So thank you everybody for coming, and hope you have a good day. We'll see you at the next CovYouth 101.
See ya.